In the fight against climate change, corruption, inequality, and injustice, a new generation of leaders are raising their voices, becoming a force of hope around the globe. Natasha used her role as a junior reporter to track and expose practices like child marriage to protect women and girls in her native Zambia.
What we want and what is actually provided, and what is promised and what is actually done.
Natasha, you've spoken about not wanting young people just to be beneficiaries, recipients of other people's decisions, but part of the decision making. How has that played out in your experience, in your own causes?
Well, I think it has played out really well, and even if we look at the panel that we're having today, for instance, you find there's so many big conventions and meetings that people come to, and often a young person's voice is not necessarily heard. Before, that was the situation. But then now we come to these meetings and then we have resolutions, and those are actually taken seriously. So I do believe it's becoming an issue that's actually being heard, and we're not just seeing, young people are no longer just seeing as, you know, they are young and they exist, but then we're actually being involved in the whole system, and we're being asked what we want to do. But not only that, we're able to step out and actually say this is what we want, and either partner with us or we'll do it because we're powerful enough. So that's something that I have seen, and you can look at this amazing panel. I mean, they're doing all amazing things, and we haven't let our age stop us or whatever, wherever we come from. This is something that we've taken up. Another thing that's really been interesting is finding a way to actually have that intergenerational partnership. I like how you asked him about the mentorship issue, and I think it's very important because the older generation has a lot of experience, but we have ideas, we have energy, and we have solutions for the now problems and the ones that are coming up. So, you know, we need to learn to collaborate, and this is something I think is really going on well. I have seen so many different countries, and even with the 12 teenage change makers that are here today, I have heard their stories of how they're ensuring that they're putting pressure on governments and everything like that. That's good, but then at the end of the day, we don't want to come to a point where we intimidate them too much, because right now they do have, let's just be honest, right now if you look at, for example, the UN Secretary General, he has a lot of power to implement the ideas that we have. And if you put us in a room together, what we best can do is ride on that power that he has, foster our agenda, but then partner, because we're not just going to tell you what's going to happen. We want to be involved from the start to the end, because it's going to benefit all of us. So my journey has been very interesting, actually, because right now my journey has been very interesting, especially back home. I run my own foundation, and we do exactly this. We amplify the voices of young people doing amazing things, and then also empower them to be able to step out, because like what was mentioned, sometimes all they need to know is just, you can do it. You don't have to be limited. And if someone like me, someone like Salvador or Greta is able to do it, then they can too. And so that's something we've been working on, and we look forward to doing a lot more. But otherwise, I think this is a really good start. It's a sign of hope, and we know that there's more that we can look forward to, and in being involved in these spaces. Yeah.
Oh, well said. I'll throw this out to the group. You've all met a lot of politicians on your journeys. Does it, do any of you have interest in politics? Do you think you have to be in politics to make change in government at some level? Or are you turned off?
I believe the political aspect of any society is very important, because they are the governing and administrative body. And I do believe that if someone is involved, if they do want to take up that career, it's a good place to implement change. Because, you know, it's one thing, for instance, to come here, and many countries signed to the Paris Agreement on the carbon energy and reducing on the carbon that's being exhibited, that's being taken into the atmosphere. But then if you look at it, and people have signed to that, and then the people with the power to actually make that law back home are in the political and governing system. So you then realize that a law can actually determine whether something can move forward or not, because it's like you're backing. So I do believe it is important that we do have politicians changing the world as well, and wanting to ensure that we foster ahead. But I don't believe that that's the only way that we can actually foster change. I don't believe the power lies in them. It lies in every individual discovering what they're supposed to do, and then fostering that, and deciding that they want to shape the change they want. So I personally want to want to maybe later on. I am interested in politics a lot. But then it's not something I would like to take up full-time, just probably, like I said, partnering with them a lot to ensure that we actually foster this agenda. So
you talked about hope. Do you feel, as you're out in the world, that do you feel hope? Do you feel that you're being listened to, or how much, or is it lip service? What from the adults? You meet so many politicians, so many business leaders. Are they really listening? Are we really listening?
It's good that you said, are we really listening? So, because at the end of the day, I do believe right now, we're living in a generation where we've got powerful voices and powerful minds, and put together, we can foster this powerful energy that can transform whatever society. But then, to be honest, I do have a lot of hope. I am very optimistic about what's going to happen and the change we're going to bring. But then sometimes it's not always that we're being heard. Sometimes it's coming to conventions and, let's have young people speak on a panel. Let them bring out that energy. Later on, what happens? Where is the system that actually ensures that these young people are integrated? Because they do have ideas. And even if they don't have the skills, why not invest in those skills so they can be involved in governing bodies like she has? And it's very rare that we find someone like her. So if we really want to change the world, I feel this is a good start, yes. And I do believe that all of you are listening to me right now. But then it's beyond just me talking and having your ears out. It's actually acting and supporting me in this journey later on. What exactly are you going to do to ensure that what we say is going to be done back home? Because we're not going to be in Davos forever. But then back home also, and then just going back and having that system in place. So that's my major gap in all these things. We just don't have a proper system in place where young people are not just heard, but then their actions are supported and we're involved holistically in the system. So that's my answer. But we do have a lot of hope. I do have a lot of hope personally, and I believe with such powerful minds, who wouldn't have hope?
Natasha, is there a moment that just in your work where you just, hey, it happened, it clicked, I made a difference?
Yes, there was a moment. There was a summit on ending child marriages that took place in Ghana. I think in 2018 towards the end of it. And so I was asked to give the opening speech, which was the opening ceremony, and then just express what exactly I would like for African girls in terms of, our sexuality, our reproductive health, and everything just to do with that. And so after that speech, I did go back home and we started organizing different groups. I worked with different NGOs and would go in communities and would advocate and raise awareness on these issues. But then what really struck me the most is how I mentioned something on menstrual health, for instance, and then it was actually implemented. Like, that's something we started seeing in different countries happening. And then I mentioned how we need to increase budgetary allocations towards sexual reproductive health. And of course, the allocations were not as high as I wanted them to go, but then it's something that we saw happening and the progress was made. And then later on, I actually got my hands on an article, and it attributed the speech that I had given and the work that I was doing, having helped thousands of girls get rescued from teenage marriages and rehabilitation processes being put in place for them to actually be able to get away, like from the teenage pregnancies and recover from all that. So, of course, it wasn't just Natasha once alone because of what, but then it attributed that speech and some of the things I said and some of what the leaders had actually pointed out from that speech and how they got those commitments and took them home and decided to act on it. So for me, that was a revolutionary moment because I only saw the article this year, and that was in 2018, actually late last year. And so I do believe that it's on such platforms, yes, that we can be heard, and there are leaders that we can influence and all that. But then, the action is what, like what she said, it's the action that actually counts. And so for me, that was like the highlight. I couldn't stop smiling because in as much as there were many other voices and of course many other actors and players towards that success, the fact that I was a voice that was a part of that solution was a big thing for me. And so that was like my moment. I was happy with that.
That's great.
Just to add on to what he's actually said, I like that he's mentioned how we have access to all these different devices and platforms to actually express ourselves and, just raise awareness on whatever we want to raise awareness on. But then we've got, in contrast with what used to happen, I'm from Africa, I'm Zambian, and so I see many young people, of course. We have so many young people, brilliant ideas, and, they can articulate the problem for you. Like A to Z, they will tell you the problem. And I don't think it's just a Zambian thing. I think it's generally everywhere. People can can easily identify what the problem is and then sort of acting and bringing out the solution is where many people are, that's where the platform comes in. And I think with the knowledge and exposure that we have right now, it's good for this generation because away from just looking at what the problem is, we have people that we could use as inspirations that we could match out to, and we could say, okay, they did this, then we can do this. But then it's also easier to identify what the solution is because we can look at best practices from before and then just bring that and integrate it into our fights. So that's something that we really need to do. But then I feel as though right now, Gen Z is a very active, very loud, and it's very powerful. But then to an extent, sometimes it's not as daring as we would wish for everyone else to be. Like this current generation, of course, we do have, exceptionals. We do have exceptions rather. But then like right now, I feel as though we could be a bit more louder. We could be a bit more on the ground. But then, it's social media. Let's tweet. Let's do this. And it's very powerful, of course. But then I feel as though our collaborative efforts could be more, we could be more on the scene if we came together and used platforms such as strikes, for instance, and all that. And if we could see that going on around the world and not just in particular places, then I feel it would be more powerful. And that's something I think the past generation did a little better than us, being more involved on the ground than other just, following up and everything else is something that we lack. But I feel as though we have diverse knowledge, we have people who can articulate issues and everything else, but then we just need more actors on the ground to just step up and say, we'll do this, and we're daring enough to actually foster the change that we want to see.
So there's a power in social media, but also a danger that we're staring at our phones instead of
Exactly, instead of being on the
feet.
ground, yes.
Right.
So that's something we need to. I could probably add on because I've been in the media for quite some time. And I do believe, I actually had a conversation with Salvador the other night, and we were talking about how sometimes it's just a matter, the media thinks as though, the power lies in all these things and what people are talking about, but then they actually have the power to make this a huge conversation. It's all in the media. So the media has got, the power to shape the minds of what we have and, put us at the center of any conversation. But then it's just sometimes people don't necessarily find interest in such issues. It's 1 or 2 days, there's gonna be the World Economic Forum, and then afterwards it's like no one wants to follow up the story or anything like that. And mostly it's the juicy stuff, like an argument between a politician and a young activist, and this and that, and it's all negatives, and sort of brings people to a point where sometimes the situation is not even as bad as it looks, but because the media exaggerates it, it makes it harder. So I really think the media can be very supportive in amplifying the voices and works of different young people in different communities and societies. It would be really good because then it also starts reshaping the minds of people to realize that young people are powerful enough to do it, and they can also find ways to support us. And then secondly, the media should just be heavily involved in bringing hope, because sometimes that's all that we need. I love the quote that I heard last night, and he was talking about everything we do with hope. And so if the media has that much power to bring hope and entice hope in everyone for us to actually be part of the solution, then that would be a great thing. And the media is really just, it's considered the fourth estate of government. That's how powerful it is. It's a tool that can foster any agenda. With the media, we can do so much. And so I believe the media is very powerful and very instrumental in our work. All it has to do is just realize that they are the ones who determine how big this goes. And so if they could amplify the works and, the stuff we're doing, the young people, such forums as well, and just educate and enlighten the society, then we'll do a lot more.
Go ahead.
I would just like to answer, do you think that is realistic, or they fall into the same power traps? I do think it's very realistic, and like he mentioned, there's so much that we can look forward to, and there's a lot of hope that we can actually step into, but then this will need a lot of investment, and it will need a lot of mentorship, like we mentioned earlier on. And honestly, I do have a lot of hope for the future heads of states and the future, leaders in political areas and all those things. But then I really think it is realistic, but it also depends on how much we decide to invest in us now for later on. My message would basically just be, like we've been mentioning, it's basically investing and involving young people in all these decision-making processes. But then for every individual here, what I would really like all of us to go back home with is the idea and the realization that the power that we're trying to speak to, the truth and the power that we're trying to speak here is not going to happen just because we have powerful individuals in the room. It's not going to take place, and the change we want to shape is not going to happen just because we're raising these issues. But it's going to happen when we imagine the change and then ask ourselves, what can we do about it? Who are we going to put pressure on? Who are we going to organize? How we mobilize it back home? And that's something I'm really going to carry home, but I urge everyone in here. It's not about being young or old. It's of course important that each of us realize what our strengths and weaknesses are, but then just ask yourself this one question: how will you be part of the change that we're trying to see? Thank you.
That seems like a terrific place to wrap it up. I want to thank all of you for the work you're doing, for the inspiration you bring to so many of us, for the advice and reverse mentorship, as we were talking about before. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody in the audience did, so thank you.